Welcome back to the Path to Tech podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories from tech industry insiders. I'm your host, Vishal. Today, we're joined by Zach Jensz, a software engineer at Prezzee who's making webs in the Melbourne tech community. Zach is not just a developer, he's a passionate community builder who leads Melbourne CSS and also serves as GDG Melbourne organizer. You might have seen him speaking at Web Directions or GDG Melbourne, or even React Melbourne. Zach is also passionate about sharing his knowledge with over 4,000 reputation in Stack Overflow. Zach is also an avid speaker and frequently gives talks on the latest developments in web technologies like CSS and JS. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Likewise, it's really good to have you today. I really wanted to have this conversation with you for a while. We met each other, I think, at an event. Could have been GDG Melbourne Dev Fest last year, 2023. And I've also seen you be active across so many different tech communities in Melbourne. And I'm glad you're finally here and we're having this conversation.
Me too.
So let's kick off at the very beginning. So your journey into tech is quite interesting. You were managing an IGA while building games and learning web development as well. What sparked your interest in technology, and how did you maintain your passion when you were working in retail?
I guess I started out making games because I was playing games, and I wanted to add stuff to the game.
Right.
I wanted to expand the map and add items, and so I got into a program called Game Maker, and that got me really passionate about creating things digitally. I guess I had a history of building things outside the tech world, and so building things digitally sort of was the natural progression.
Nice. Yeah. What kind of things did you use to build outside the tech world?
Yeah, so when I started, it was mainly small, simple games. Barely even games because I was still learning game design, I guess. But yeah, one of them was there was a bunch of goods on the screen like jewels and collectibles, and in a normal game, it'd be a challenge to collect all of the prizes within the game.
Yes.
There'd be a reward. But in this game, there was no adversary.
Right.
And so you just went around clicking and collecting everything.
Okay.
So it started out very simple.
Happy days.
Yes.
Yeah. That's wonderful. More recently, obviously, you're now working as a full stack engineer at Prezzee, and you also did some upskilling with React and full stack technologies, where you did some courses yourself with Web Dev Simplified, and also Kevin Powell, some of his CSS courses.
Very good YouTubers.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. How do you approach continuous learning and upskilling? What's your method with which you decide what to learn next, and what tools do you use to learn those technologies?
Yeah, so with upskilling, I look at what I want to achieve, and I work backwards into what technology enables me to achieve that.
Right.
So when I was moving from game development into web development, it was an issue of a lot of people were viewing my games on itch.io and Steam, I think it was Greenlight or Workshop, and not many people actually bothered to download it because Windows comes up with all these, this is a virus, click if you absolutely trust this random game on the internet.
Yeah.
And so that brought me to the web, where it was solving this problem of friction in starting something. So what I love about the web platform is that you can just go to a URL and your entire application is downloaded and ready to go.
Yeah. I completely relate with that. I think that's also one of the things that led me to pursue web development. Just the amount of friction that people have to go through in order to use your product is virtually non-existent if they have a browser, right? So web is a wonderful technology. I definitely align with your views there. Let's move on to community, right? Building tech community is something that you are really invested in. You lead Melbourne CSS. You frequently give talks at React Melbourne, Melb.js, GDG Melbourne as well. And you also answer questions on Stack Overflow. You've helped a lot of people with they're questions about web technologies. And
I was surprised someone noticed.
well, good work. Seldom goes unnoticed. And you have collected 4,000 reputations. And I had a spurt where I probably spent a couple of weeks doing Stack Overflow back in 2021, and I managed to get 700 reputation. So I know what it takes to build up to 4,000. So my question to you is, what's the most interesting problem that you have helped solve, and what did you learn from it?
I probably couldn't choose one. Mm-hmm. I could choose sort of a pattern. A lot of questions need help with, well, I guess I focus on CSS because that's sort of my area of expertise. And a lot of questions don't understand the inner workings of CSS.
Right.
So I guess my favorite answers on there are describing how something works under the hood. And it's challenging for me because in order to simplify an answer down to something that makes sense to a beginner, you have to really dig in and understand how it works under the hood. So even though some of these things I already knew, answering a Stack Overflow question sort of forced me to know it even better. And know it so well that I can simplify it down to a nice, concise answer to their specific problem.
That's wonderful. As part of my teaching that I do at Skillaroo, where I run our boot camps for full stack web development, I found the process of teaching someone something compels you to first do a lot of work and understand it in depth. And I also found instances where I actually learned something in more of a depth because I had to teach it rather than I just had to use it and deliver a feature. So yeah, that totally makes sense.
It's an extra layer of understanding.
Exactly. So you're like I mentioned earlier, you're heavily involved in the Melbourne tech community, leading Melbourne CSS and being an organizer with GDC Melbourne. So what motivated you to take on these leadership roles so early on in your career?
Getting a job.
Right.
Yeah, getting into tech. That was my path.
Okay. So is this something you would recommend to other people looking for a job as well?
Yes, to an extent.
Right.
It's a lot of work. So it's the surefire strategy to eventually get a job. It still did take me quite a while. I would say if you're willing to put in a lot of work, it's worth it. Okay. Because it gets you further than someone who isn't a large part of the community.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely something good on your resume. It gets you connections, valuable relationships. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of reward as well.
Do you also see the work you do with these communities as a source of inspiration for the work that you do as well? Does it inspire you meeting these people who are motivated about tech, they want to learn something, they want to grow? Is that something that you derive inspiration from?
Something I love about attending meetups is you'll find out what people are actually doing. So you'll read a lot online, and you might even watch a lot of YouTube videos, listen to wonderful podcasts like this one, but until you meet people in person and have actual conversations at the pub after the meetup, that's when you really get to know what's going on in the industry.
So 2 drinks later.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks, Zach. I think staying on this theme, because you have exposure to the Melbourne tech community and you're meeting all of these incredible people from different walks of life, the tech scene here is vibrant but competitive. What is that difference that you see between people who are looking for a job versus people who actually land a job?
So what can people do to land a job, essentially?
What are they not doing?
What differentiates them?
Yes.
I would say probably showing potential. So I see a lot of beginners focus on knowing everything.
Okay.
And if you focus on knowing everything, you're never going to land a job. Because once you've learned everything, there will be new things to learn. And you'll never, if you're on a moving vehicle driving away from where you want to go, it doesn't matter how much you run on top of that vehicle, you're never going to reach where you want to go. So don't focus on knowing everything, because you'll never land that job. What you have to focus on is showing to an employer that you're keen, that you can learn quickly, showing that potential. So they don't really care as a beginner how much you actually know.
Right.
Of course, you want to know the basics of what you're getting into.
Yeah.
But show them that you have potential.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Let's dive a little bit deeper into your response. So you are not going to finish learning everything. So you want to do things that show employer that you have a potential to be good, right? So what are some of these things that you could be doing? Like, is it going to the meetups? Is it doing projects or writing blogs? What are some of the concrete things that people can start doing?
All of those things and more. Okay. Yeah. So go to meetups, post about them on your LinkedIn, evidence. Yeah. Give a talk. So that not only shows technical skill of what you're talking about, but also soft skills. You can get up on stage. You can communicate with people. And it's also sort of sets you apart. Most people don't do that. Yeah. So that gives you an advantage. Yeah, definitely write a blog. Mine's dead, but hopefully revive it soon. Make a YouTube video on how to do something. Make your own podcast. I mean, possibilities are endless. Just create things. Yeah. So you can enter tutorial hell where you're constantly following along with how to do something. But I'd say create more things.
Right. That's wonderful advice. Just picking up on the talks part that you said, do you have any advice for people who want to do this, but they think they're not ready for this yet? They probably think nobody will be interested in what they have to say, or they don't have the public speaking skills. Do you have any suggestions, tips, advice for them?
I'd say if you've already made a lot of projects and you want to start getting into public speaking, maybe the first thing you could do is write a blog article, or just a blog, on something that really interests you, so that you're passionate to follow it through. And then try and come up with some key dot points from that blog, and give a small little talk just to a inanimate object. Yeah. So give this talk to your pillow, or give this talk to your toothbrush. Right. And you'll develop a basic ability to speak on the fly, and there's no pressure in that situation. You can sort of start figuring out how you're gonna give a talk on the fly. Like when I give a talk, I don't actually write an entire script. So this is getting into more speaking advice, but I found that in high school, a lot of people were stressed about giving talks, and the oral presentation was always difficult. I found it was mainly because most people overcomplicate things, and they don't know something well enough to give the talk without reading all of the slides. Right. So the way to do things is to write your blog, come up with all the key dot points, and then practice in front of an inanimate object so that you get used to smoothing out all of these key dot points of information with just your personality and just speaking like you would to friends. And keep your slides simple. Yeah. So the people watching, they don't have too much, they don't want to read a massive long slide while you're also talking. They got to listen to you and look at the slide at the same time. So keep your slides small and fun, and don't worry about it too much, because most people, they'll have a few beers at these meetups. They'll be relaxed. They've had a long day at work, and you could be talking about whatever you like, and they're likely just very interested that someone's willing to get up on stage and give a talk. So yeah, don't stress about it too much, and yeah, just dot points, practice a lot, and maybe get a family member once you've moved on from the toothbrush and actually speak to a real person.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the sort of progression that I'd recommend. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, and you being an avid speaker who has done it a couple of times, I think you know, this is a really incredible advice that people can take on, and you know, I think don't wait until you're ready, right? So you start doing it, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable.
Well,
yeah.
even for me, it feels a little bit uncomfortable still.
Right.
It's always going to be a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Because you're in front of a lot of people. Maybe I'll write a blog post on how to give a talk. Maybe I'll give a talk on how to give a talk.
That's incredible,
Yeah.
and very meta. I'll make
Yes.
sure that add the link in the podcast description as well, if it comes out before
Sure.
they release the podcast. Thank you, Zach. So let's move on to the talks that you do, right? Because you've done talks at various different places for various different organizations, and you have a knack for coming up with really interesting titles for your talks.
Yes.
You know, like some of the talks that come to my mind are "You suck at CSS," or "How to make your site fail," or how I code 1,000% faster without breaking my fingers, right?
So I had help with that title.
You did? What's your process for choosing these topics and crafting these presentations that resonate with your audience?
I choose something that I'm passionate about, obviously, and then I sort of figure out what might interest people. And catchy titles will get you to come to a talk.
Yes.
They'll bring people into a meetup and just make you want to listen. Yeah, they'll get people excited to actually hear what you have to say. So even if you have a boring talk on something, like say you want to give a talk on the new map and set methods in JavaScript.
How exciting.
That doesn't sound that interesting, does it? New map and set. I mean, some people love JavaScript. That's interesting to them.
Yeah.
But maybe you could come up with a title such as, "You're using maps and sets wrong. Here's how to use them."
Yeah.
Or maybe you could have, "There's new map and set methods that don't do what you think." You got to make it exciting.
Right.
So
Yeah.
people are very interested. They want to come to your talk.
Yeah. It's sales and marketing at the end
Exactly.
of the day.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Definitely.
That's wonderful. I really like that. I should be creative around my talks as well. Let's go into the contents of some of these talks, right? So you talk "How I code 1,000% faster without breaking my fingers." What was it about? What are some of the takeaways from that talk that our audience can take away?
The key areas of the talk, it started off, I think, with keyboards. So my keyboard journey, I started off with just the regular, I think we used the US keyboard here, and I progressed from the US keyboard to, like I had a full-size keyboard with the numpad and the extra keys and everything, and then I shrunk down to like a 60% keyboard, which has much less keys on it. And then I got a split keyboard, which lets you keep your shoulders wider, and it's more comfortable, and it looks cooler.
Yes, it
Very
does.
important fact. And it's columnar, meaning that the keys, when you move your finger up to go to the key above, you don't also have to move it sideways.
Okay.
It's directly above.
Right.
So it's more comfortable to type on. It took me about only 3 or 4 weeks to adjust to. But
Even
the big
with the
thing,
split keyboard as well?
split keyboard, I think it only took me only one key I had to adjust to. I
Okay.
think it was the letter B,
Yeah.
which I'd normally accessed with the wrong hand.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember. There was one key that was tricky.
Okay.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very quick to adjust to. But yeah, then to columnar, and that I found that more comfortable. There's also ortholinear, where everything's in a grid, but I find that less comfortable. And I got a keyboard with no printing on the keycaps, so all the keycaps are the same graphic. It's all just a blank dash, and so you have to memorize where everything is, which I think is good, because then you're forced to touch type. And it also adds a lot of security to your setup. You know, someone who can't touch type is unable to access your computer.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So that was the first part of the talk. Then it sort of moved on to, again, touch type.
Yeah.
So learn to touch type, get fast at that. That was another main part of the talk. I covered keyboard shortcuts, so getting familiar with everything. I use a tiling window manager on my Linux machines, which allows you to just quickly move windows around without having to switch to the mouse and drag stuff around. And the amount of time that you spend shrinking a window just to the right size that you want. I think for Mac OS there's a program called Rectangle.
Oh, it comes with the OS now.
Oh, it does come with the OS now, yeah. I can't remember if I set up the OS keybinds or rectangles, but yeah, it took some adjusting getting onto Mac for work. But on Linux, I love the tiling window manager programs that you can use. Yeah, so keyboard, touch typing, keyboard shortcuts, and Vim was another main part of the talk. Yeah. So normally in your text editor, if you hit J or K on the keyboard, it'll put a J or a K character inside the file. But in Vim, it's a modal text editor. So you have one mode where it does that and it puts the characters in the text. But you have another mode where J or K would move the cursor and perform an action. So in Vim, the idea is that you don't have to move your fingers around the keyboard as much, and you have these modes. So you'll be in insert mode some of the time typing text, but a lot of the time when coding, you're actually moving around text. You're not really editing the text itself. And so you have this whole other mode that lets you use the close home row keys and everything to navigate the document as well. And you might think, what's the point in that? I like just moving up and down lines with J and K. Well, you can do things like C, I, and then quote. And what that will do is it's like a mnemonic change inside quote. So if you're on the beginning of a line and there's a string that you want to change inside, you just do C, I, quote. It will take you to the start of the quote, delete everything inside of it, and then put you into insert mode, and you can begin typing your replacement string. So it's a lot of getting used to, but once you are used to it, it's insanely fast to edit text and move around text. So those were the main components of the talk. Go and listen to the talk. If you,
I will.
I hope I've sold it.
I will. I am a Linux user myself. Oh, sorry, not Linux user, Vim user myself.
Oh, fantastic.
And I love the fact that I can get around the file just from the home row without moving my fingers at all from the keyboard. It's so sweet. And no matter what app I use, I need Vim bindings. If it's VS Code, I've got my Vim binding. If it's Obsidian for my note taking, I've got my Vim binding.
I'm very impressed by the Obsidian notes.
Sometimes I miss Vim bindings when I'm using a browser. You know, like I feel like, why can't I?
You can get them in the browser.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, once you use it, I think there's no going back. And people who learn Vim and then move on to other text editors still keep the key bindings from Vim and carry it across because just how efficient it makes them.
I use the surfing keys extension. There is also I think it's Vimium in the browser, so they're both good extensions. But I'd love to see, maybe I'd make one when I have time, is a web browser with first-class Vim support. I think there is on Linux. I forget the name. I think it's like Qt browser, or like some derivation of it that is first-class Vim. So everything you do in the web browser is Vim based. But it doesn't have the support that Chromium would have. So a Chromium based Vim browser would be epic.
It's everywhere. Even in your command line, when you're using your terminal and you're typing out a commands, you can use Vim bindings there as well. There's also this program called Readline, which a lot of these CLI apps tend to use. And if they have used readline, then Vim bindings work there as well. So you learn it once and you take it everywhere you go. Yeah, I love it. I think it pays a lot of dividends once you pick it up. But
I think it's been around since like the beginning of computing.
Yeah.
And that's how you know that it is good.
Yeah, yeah. It's probably older than my dad. But let's continue on. There's another talk that I was really intrigued by, title of the talk, and this one is how to make a site fail. And you gave this talk. I think you also gave it to React Melbourne as well. In your experience, what's the most surprising ways that people find a way to make their sites fail?
So the title was to get people. It was like get you interested. Why would I want to make my site fail? And yeah, so the concept is your site is going to fail because browsers. I mean, cross-browser support for features is really good. But what if someone has an old browser? What if they've got an old iPhone where you have to use Safari? Even if you're using another browser, it uses Safari under the hood.
Yeah.
And you don't want to update to the latest iPhone. You don't have the cache. You're on an old device. Some things are going to fail because browsers, they have to update with all the new features. And if you don't update iOS, you don't get a new version of Safari. Things are going to fail on a website. So how do you design around that?
Okay.
With the web, we're into these things like progressive enhancement and starting off with HTML, then adding CSS, and then adding your JavaScript. So the talk was around progressive enhancement and how to design your sites so that it fails gracefully.
Yeah.
So if you're in a terminal browser, you can visit websites without a graphical interface at all. Well, I guess the terminal is a graphical interface, but it's all text. And so you can view websites in the terminal, and that's just with HTML. There might be a dash of CSS in there. And that should be able to work for a blog or for content sites. You should be able to view them in the terminal. And then if you upgrade to a modern web browser but disable JavaScript, or maybe the JavaScript is really slow to load, everything should work until that JavaScript comes in. Of course, you want the JavaScript to make everything better and interactive, but everything should still work with the HTML and the CSS.
Okay.
So it's about designing a resilient code for your site.
Right.
CSS, you might load in all this CSS that most of it works fine, but you're on an old device, old browser. This new property that you're using doesn't work. How do you design around adding that in?
Yeah.
So I think in the talk, I said something along the lines of, you can use modern bleeding edge CSS today and support new browsers and support old browsers, because the old browsers will just have a slightly worse version. So say for instance, border radius has been around for eons, but say for instance it's a new feature. We've just got border radius in CSS. That's an easy progressive enhancement, because if you're on an old browser that doesn't support it, you'll just get a button with sharp corners. Whereas if you're on a new browser, you get the design that you want. And I guess in a company, you'd have to communicate with the design team, hey, are you okay with this being different in old browsers? And that way you get to use the new feature today. It's quantum CSS. Yeah. It works both ways. Of course, you could add in polyfills and have like a image for each corner like they did back in the day, but that's trade-offs.
Bad old days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, so it's not about different kinds of bugs that people introduce to the code, but it's about designing failing with grace in mind when our website loads in an environment where CSS or JavaScript might not be fully there, or it might be outdated.
It's not about introducing the bug. Yeah, it's about dealing with the bug in the browser. Yeah. Because it's an old browser and I guess it's buggy because it doesn't have the new features. Yeah. Yeah.
Got it. That's really interesting. I should keep a reminder so that I come to one of your talks that you're doing next and not miss it in person. let's take this conversation to speculating about tech, right? Predicting the future. So my a lot of the work that I do in tech these days tend to be with generative AI and agentic AI. So still not doing ML side of things. So not training models or doing stuff with CUDA and LoRa and fine tuning and that kind of stuff, but basically using generative APIs to build web applications. My question to you is, what are your thoughts in the advancement that we have seen recently in generative AI? And is it likely to impact the tech industry or the wider world? What are your thoughts?
I think it's definitely already made an impact. I see a lot of innovation just now and in the future. But I also see a lot of fear. I see a lot of people scared. Should I get a tech job? Isn't AI going to replace us? And I think that you should still go for it. Because if AI doesn't replace us, you'll have a tech job. And if AI does replace us, you've got bigger things to worry about.
Yeah, it's really good. So that's the job angle. Whether building a career in software engineering is a safe endeavor with the emergence of AI. What about the wider world? How do you think AI is going to impact the wider world outside of the tech industry?
Quite a bit. I've seen some really cool innovation in farming.
Okay.
Yeah, so I saw these robots that scour a field and they would detect weeds with, it's not like the LLM tech that we've got recently, but it's this old tech that's...
computer vision?
Yeah, computer vision that's, what's the word? That's evolved alongside when LLMs have sort of come into fashion. And it's gotten really good to the point where they can detect weeds on a massive field, and just this robot just plodding along slow, like it doesn't have to go fast because weeds just has to match the pace of the weeds growing. And they've got different attachments. One has a laser, and it'll shoot a laser at all the weeds on the field. One of them punches them into the ground. It'll just punch the weed down.
Right.
And then another one had, I think it just had spray. But the idea is that you no longer have to spray things.
Yeah.
You can just laser it or punch it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, being able to, like, we've gone from, hunter-gatherer to planting seeds in the ground, and like, you could eat those seeds, but no, you chose to put them in the ground and grow food, to robots that go around and weed for us.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Let's extrapolate it a little bit, right? So where do you think we'll be in 10 years?
In 10 years? It's very hard. I don't know. Yeah. We'll definitely have less of the boring jobs around. I think using your brain for things will matter more. At the moment, you can do a lot of mindless work, but I think a lot of that mindless work is going to be done by the machines, because they don't need a mind to do it.
Yeah.
They just need statistics and a lot of brute force, a lot of NVIDIA chips. So yeah, more work where you really have to think and do what the machine can't do.
Okay, yeah. Let's do one more about AI. I promise I'm not gonna, bore you to death with the AI questions. But I want to know what you really think about generative AI and all the hype, right? Especially the last couple of days with the new model from China, DeepSeek R1, and NVIDIA losing $500 billion worth of market value, and these periods where the whole industry is hyped up and then the whole industry sort of loses confidence. What do you think about your personal opinion about generative AI?
There is a lot of hype. I think there is much more hype than there needs to be. I think it is a useful technology. I see a lot of people thinking that it will do their job for them, which, like I said, the basic jobs where you don't really have to think, sure. But it's not capable of thinking yet. And if we're speaking on like a 10-year trajectory, I don't think we'll get general artificial intelligence by then, which is where it's sentient and it can actually think can do complex things. But I think it will continue to evolve. One worrying aspect is LLMs are generating a lot of new content. And we know that inbreeding is bad. AI inbreeding is bad. So I feel that we will see more people, I guess more investment in good data sets and large repositories of data and information that's valuable will become it's already gold, but it will be way more serious. And I think the issue will be how do we make sure our LLM is being trained on the right stuff? Because right now we're sort of just collecting all of the internet and dumping it into NVIDIA's products. I think the focus will be on the source data that we're feeding into these networks.
Okay. I promise I won't ask any more question, but I still have one more sort of follow-up.
Of course.
While you're saying that, I get a sense that you're not quite convinced with the way we are training our models. Not we, as in us, but the gatekeepers or the luminaries of the world, right? So there's a lot of brute forcing. There's a lot of GPUs. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of water being wasted.
Yes.
It's very harmful for the environment, and they're talking about spinning up these micronuclear reactors in all the data centers to be able to sort of feed these hungry machines with the power. And also, it's at the end of the day, it's a probabilistic model, right? It's people have said that it is a stochastic parrot. So essentially, what it's doing is probabilistically predicting the next token, but
it's slightly in between regurgitating everything that already exists and coming up with something completely random, and you're just sort of in the middle somewhere, and you turn up the I think is it the temperature?
Yes.
And you're somewhere in between those two.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much all it is.
Yeah. Where I have slightly different opinion from you, I think, is the fact that all of that is true, right? All of that, we're brute forcing it. We're not being smart about the algorithms. We're definitely wasting compute and energy and water. But what we see from these systems once they have been trained is these emergent properties, right? You love analogies. Let me give you one, right? So you probably have seen a flock of birds or starlings flying in these wonderful patterns in a big flock where there are hundreds of birds. And it looks like they're doing a dance where they sort of fly across the sky, and there's this shape, it molds and forms into different shapes. But none of those individual starlings is planning to do the dance, right? They're just looking at their closest neighbor birds. They're just following the path. And then as a whole, the system has an emergent property that is not as a result of any one of those individual birds. Just like that, I think while all of those things are true, and while we probably are not being as smart as we could be in creating these models, we do see emergence of smart, quote unquote smart, because it can do the test for the medical examination, do the test for the lawyer's examinations, all the tests you can give it will excel at that. So it can pretend it has intelligence, and it can even fool smart people that it has intelligence.
It fooled someone at Google into thinking that created sentience.
Oh wow! Yeah.
A while back.
I think I had a little bit about that story as well. But yeah, fascinating stuff.
Well, if the good guys are in charge of AI, I hope you're right. If the bad guys are in charge of it, I hope you're wrong.
Thanks, Zach. The next thing I wanted to touch on was your role at Prezzee as a software engineer. Can you tell us a little bit more about what do you do at Prezzee? What is your role about, and what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so at Prezzee, I work on the front-end consumer team. So we've got a bunch of React micro front-ends, which essentially we've taken, instead of having one big React app for everything, we've got lots of little React apps that use each other. And so I work at the moment on fixing UI things, adding simple new components here and there. But once I'm learning more of the code base, I'm looking to become, it's called SME, subject matter expert. I want to pick a few things that I like to focus on.
Yeah.
One of them is localization.
Okay.
So at the moment at Prezzee, we've released to Canada, and we're rolling out new features. Canada also speak French.
They do?
And so a legal requirement is that we have to have English and French. Yeah. So we have to redesign the code base so that any string of text that's on the UI has to be able to be localized. So we're using Crowdin for that, and we have to pass in all the English strings from Figma, from the design team, and we want to automate things so that we don't have to check every time, yes, we've got enough text for this and it lines up correctly with what design want, manually downloading JSON files of locale strings and like fussing about with stuff. We want to automate everything. So that's a very interesting area. Another interesting area that I might look into, or that I'm looking into and might stick around with, is Webpack.
Right.
So we use Webpack to build everything and to manage our micro front-end architecture, module federation. So learning how Webpack works, how to optimize the waterfall loading of our site, how to deal with all the there's a lot of code being passed over the wire to download our web app.
Yeah.
So minimizing that as much as we can,
Yeah.
optimizing everything, that's something I'm passionate about. And it goes back into how we sort of tied in at the start. I like figuring out what we want to give the user, and then at the moment Webpack is the technology that we're using for that, but maybe down the line something newer, more efficient, quicker on both the user side and the dev side.
Yeah, yeah, that all sounds really interesting, and I can imagine how much fun it must be working with Webpack. I've heard a lot of good things about it. So Zach, we've arrived towards the end of the podcast now. It has been really pretty great speaking with you about all these broad range of topics. So towards the end of the conversation, we typically have a rapid fire round with our guests.
I'm scared.
Trust me, it's not something you should be scared of, but it's good fun, right? So the idea is for me to ask you a question and for you to answer in as little amount of words as possible, right? Whatever comes to your mind first.
All right.
Let's kick this off. First, a really easy one. What's your most used emoji in your Slack?
Oh. Maybe a thumbs up or
Thumbs
a heart.
up. Okay, that's pretty
maybe
generic.
A heart. Yeah, maybe a heart.
All right.
Usually if I like someone's message or idea, I'll heart it.
Right.
Yeah, it's probably.
For me, it's probably the 100 emoji.
Nice. Yeah.
I like that. Next, as an expert in CSS, CSS grid versus Flexbox, which would you choose first and why?
I'd say grid first.
Right.
It's underrated. A lot of people go straight to Flexbox.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say grid first. But really, you should be using both.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not complementing. They're complementing each other. Not meant to do the
Should
same
I
thing,
use
right?
a spade or a screwdriver?
Exactly.
Yes.
I love how you answer questions by giving other questions and analogies. Right. Next question. What's the quickest way to make a newcomer feel welcome in a tech community?
Like if you're within a tech community, like an in-person event.
Yeah,
and
you're an organizer or you're there and you want to make sure that everybody's having a good time.
Yeah, walk up to them, smile, say hi, introduce yourself, and ask them about where they're at. Yeah.
It's easy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not hard.
It's all about being human. Next one. This one is hot take. Tailwind is just inline CSS with extra steps. Do you agree? Not just Tailwind, but all of these CSS libraries that aim to do CSS better.
It's a trade-off. So Tailwind is just one library. Yeah, there's a bunch of other libraries that do the same thing. I think even Bootstrap is quite similar, just different trade-offs. They all make the sort of the main trade-off, which is, should I bother coming up with class names for everything and separate my markup from my styles, or should I just put my styles directly in my markup? And it's called the separation of concerns. So if you're running a blog and you've got a bunch of posts, a bunch of articles, and they're all essentially just information, it makes sense to separate the concerns. You want to be able to edit the CSS in one file and have your entire site in a new color, in a new theme. That's where you want to separate concerns.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got a web app, you might not want to separate concerns. You might want to attach the styles to that component because you're thinking of everything as components.
Yeah.
And it's a complex web application. And the path I've seen everyone moving to is get the styles close to the markup.
Yeah.
But there's that trade-off.
Yeah.
So if you want to change the color of everything, of course you've got build tools that let you update everything, but they're very complex. And you said people love Webpack. People love these technologies. So you're steering away from the power of the web platform itself, in that CSS can change everything in just one line.
Yeah.
And you're stepping into this complexity of Webpack and build tools and all this non-web technology. Like it's not web technology. It's frameworks built on top of the web.
Yeah.
And Tailwind, yes, you can build a component where the style is in your HTML, inside your React component or whatever you've got there. And yes, it will update everything because your build tools are compiling all of that for you. But there's all that complexity.
Yeah.
You could just update the CSS in your simple native, web native blog site without any build tools at all. You could go completely buildless and let the web do it for you. So yeah, it's not one or the other. Like I used to hate on Tailwind, I'll admit, but there's definitely trade-offs.
Right.
And I think, base your decision off of understanding those trade-offs.
Yeah.
Awesome. So at Prezzee we use Chakra UI, which is even more complex than Tailwind. So instead of having like a Tailwind class name for every style you want, you can put JavaScript expressions in there, like you sort of put the CSS in line a bit, but you use these pre-made Chakra components, which already have styling applied to them, and then you have these theme providers and like overrides, and it's very complicated. Yeah. But it's in the React ecosystem. It plays nice with React's way of doing things. So all sorts of complicated trade-offs. It's insane.
Okay, so to summarize the conversation, hot take, Tailwind
It is just extra steps.
It's just extra steps.
It is, Tailwind is
Just
a CSS file.
CSS.
It's a CSS file. You're using the classes from Tailwind. Yeah, that's all it is. But it's good that everyone uses the same file and is consistent with the naming. I'll appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. It's good that everyone doesn't have their own version of Tailwind. Yeah. That would be pain.
Right. Thank you. Let's move on to the next one. What are your thoughts on AI code assistants? Are they lazy crutch or are they a future of development?
I found them somewhat useful. It's sort of like a autocomplete on steroids. Yep. One has to consider the environmental impact. So one ChatGPT response consumes, I read, 30 minutes worth of phone screen time of electricity, and like a whole glass of water. Wow. For one response. So you've got to weigh, that's not good on the environment. But maybe it saves you so much time that it is good for the environment, because the resources expended on the data center might be less than the resources you would expend going and researching something or coding it up yourself. Because humans need quite a bit of water and quite a bit of farming and emissions to grow food for us. So maybe it's more environmentally friendly to run the AI than to run you. So yeah, use it productively, but don't just waste it.
Yeah, wonderful. And finally, if you could force the web dev world to adopt one habit, what would it be?
One habit.
Giving up Tailwind?
One habit. Oh, I wasn't expecting this one. It's not really a habit, but I would say get in the habit of understanding how the underlying web technologies work. So a lot of people, I think the famous package is like is odd on NPM. It's like, is this number odd?
Yeah.
You want to use JavaScript to do that, a simple one-liner, and that's an extreme example, but learn to do something the way the browser can do it for you. So today I had a lot of fun with arranging dates as a string, like turning a date object into the certain type of string that you want. So at Prezzee, we're using the just the regular browser API, but we've got like a nice wrapper function around the function so that we can, around the built-in browser function so that we can always format it the same way. It's just sort of like a utility function. But use the underlying browser capability. A lot of people, they would just go straight for a library. I think one of the popular ones is Motion. No, it's not Motion.
Notion?
Not Notion. There's a popular library for dates. I know there's a new one. There's a new one in the browser that's going to be called the Temporal API. So I would say if you want to use a polyfill for that, that's okay, because it's going to be in the browser eventually. There was another one, I can't remember the name, but it'll be a library that does all the date management for you. But the issue with that is that every time someone loads your website, you can be loading all of this JavaScript. And you've got this compiler that optimizes things for you, but why optimize something when you could just not have it in the first place? So I would say do things natively, get in the habit of learning about the native browser technologies rather than reaching for a library, and you'll be sending less crap over the wire.
Yeah, totally agree. That was good advice. I think so that one habit is use the web standards rather than relying on third-party tooling to do something, if it's possible to do it with the web standards.
If it's possible, Obviously, you might need libraries for a lot of things. But yeah, optimize. Optimize it.
Awesome. Incredible. So, Zach, we've arrived at the end of the podcast. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for coming in and giving us your time. The Skiller community, I think, I'm sure it does appreciate all the incredible advice you've shared with us here. Thanks, guys, for joining us for this episode of The Path to Tech. I hope you found today's episode helpful. Signing off for today, thanking our guest, Zach, one more time. Thanks, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.